Okay, this is Viva week 9, I think. How did Washington's beliefs shape his career? Okay. Washington was wanted. Okay, I'm gonna start now. Washington wanted to keep a good reputation. He was a great strategist and he had very good self control in meetings and in the Congress room. Washington relied heavily upon his reputation. He thought of that to be one of the best things he had about his personality, and something that separated him from the regular male back in the day, and the regular congressman and politician. He made a lot of his decisions based on what the people in his towns and communities thought about him and how the American people would react to certain decisions that he made. He really wanted to be portrayed as a good, well-known, and knowledgeable man, and not just another monarch and a ruler that would take over once he got in power. A great example of him, or people knowing about his reputation and wanting him to keep a good representation, is his treasurer, Hamilton, or Alexander Hamilton. And he knew George Washington relied heavily upon how he was perceived and how he wanted to keep a well-maintained reputation among the American people. And he would always play the card where he would say, "But George Washington, remember your reputation and remember how the American people will think of you if you make this decision." And that really made George Washington go back, rethink his decision, and to make sure that he would make a good one and that it would benefit the people of America. And that also leads into him being a strategist. He always thought through every decision he made, no matter how big or small. He would go through all the possible outcomes of his decision. So if he would make a war decision of we can go into battle, he would think, if we win this war, what is it going to get us? And if we lose this war, how big of a hit is it going to take? And he would take all of those pros and cons, and he would make a good and well thought out decision of the war or any idea that he had. He knew that every decision he had would have great power because he was really one of the most powerful men back in the time in 1776, because everyone looked up to him and everyone knew he was a very knowledgeable leader and that he was very strong and had a lot of influence with his work and what he would do. And he made sure every decision was best for the American people and not just benefiting the congressmen and the politicians. Like nowadays, people would be only trying to get better lives for themselves, but forget about how the smaller people and the people that are not mentioned and not talked about are doing. He made sure everyone would benefit from one of his decisions. And he was also a well-tempered man. In the Congress room and in the meetings they would have to decide on bills and how the American people would act against the British, he would always have a good temper because he knew he could really lash out on people if he was mad. And he did sometimes, he's still human and he still makes those mistakes and flaws, but he knew when he got mad, he got angry and he got uncontrollably angry at anyone who would even talk to him. He, would try to, be well-tempered, be quiet. He didn't like when people knew his emotions or would read his face, because that made him feel weaker, and because he didn't want people to know his next move all the time. So a great story about that is about him keeping his temper is when the British general sent him a letter, the British general only addressed him as George Washington Esquire and didn't give him the full title General Washington because the general wanted to undermine him and didn't really think of the American people as their own, colony and general. So most people nowadays would lash out and be like, this man is so rude and so, so rude, and they would be petty, but George Washington only sent the mailman or like the British embassy person, I guess, back and was like, no, I will not address you back unless you properly address me. So then the mail person came back and the letter was now addressed to George Washington Esquire, etc., etc. And the mailman made sure to say that the etc., etc. was meant for General Washington, but didn't say it. So, the thought is still there. But George Washington sent it back saying, I will not address the general unless he addresses me properly first. So, he was mostly a peaceful man at times, but there was another time, a good story about when George Washington was president, before or after, I guess, after they won the Civil or the Revolutionary War, and he lashed out on the people, and Jefferson was in the room with him, and he saw a drawing of the American people. He wrote about how George Washington was like a fool and was making bad decisions, and he lashed out on Jefferson because he was saying, I didn't even want to be president, all of these decisions were put upon me, I didn't want to do this, and he was lashed out on him for no reason because, he has a temper like everyone does, and he still, is human and is like that. So that's how George Washington's beliefs and characteristics shaped his beliefs and ideals.